Hello and welcome to Wide Angle. The crisis in Ukraine has now reached a point from where it cannot deteriorate any further. It will either be very bad news or it must de-escalate. I do not know whether the panel I have collected here agrees with me. We have on my extreme right Ambassador Vivek Katju, who has studied this area reasonably. Then we have John Cherian, my colleague and editor, foreign editor of Frontline magazine, Unnikrishnan, who my colleague from olden days in ORF, and who is actually an expert on that region. Let us begin with Vivek, who has to leave urgently. Vivek, what is your take? Can it get worse?
I'm no astrologer, so I can't really chart out a course of what will happen. But clearly, of all the dimensions on this issue, and the crash was a terrible crash, and it needs to be investigated fully. But the dimension which is to me of greatest significance is of the relationship of the West now with Russia. That is the fundamental issue. The Russians have for a long time felt that the West has been encroaching on what they consider their sphere of influence. Even in the 21st century, great powers do have a notion of spheres of influence. Ukraine falls squarely in the Russian thinking, within their sphere of influence. The advance of NATO to the east towards the borders of Russia has not been looked by the Russians with equanimity, and it's natural. Now, nevertheless, the US and its European allies, more the US, less the European allies, have been relentlessly pursuing this. Earlier on, immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians did not have the capacity to withstand things. They went through a terrible crisis, which is there after the collapse of any political system, especially of the kind the Soviet Union was. But under Putin, in 2014, it's a different Russia. So now if you start imposing sanctions, if you start using the language of prescription, there will be a crisis. And I do not see the Russians giving in easily. So the wiser course would be for the great powers to pause. Now, I'm not siding with Russia. I'm only trying to analyze the situation as it obtains. That is how I see it. Now, as far as this terrible tragedy is concerned, like all tragedies, it has a political dimension and it is being used. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an investigation. In the civilized world, in the world of today, where air travel is becoming so common, you can't allow such a situation. However, at the same time, we've got to recollect that civilian airliners were brought down in the past. Who can forget that in 1988, the Americans brought down an Iranian civilian aircraft
in the Persian Gulf.
And if you recollect correctly, the Iranians they've never apologized for that. They said later it was a mistake, and they paid, the matter was settled out of court at the World Court, and they paid compensation to the Iranians. So, in today's age, these things have to be avoided, and those who fired a missile after an investigation, if that is established, must be held accountable.
John, everyone is veering around to the view that whatever happened, the shooting and the missile being sent out towards this aircraft was actually a mistake in the sense that they were looking for a military target, and this one happened by mistake. Now, the dispute is who made the mistake.
I think there was a rush to judgment as far as the Western governments were concerned, the Western media were concerned. They immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was the rebels in eastern Ukraine who fired the missile. Now, reports coming in have shown that this is not an established fact, because Russian media, Russian commentators have been saying that Ukrainian planes were seen in the area. And there were some excerpts from one of the Spanish-speaking air controllers who also talked about these two planes. So it is far from an established fact that the shots were actually fired from eastern Ukraine. And the the missile used is also found with the Ukrainian army as well as the rebels. So this rush to judgment was totally uncalled for. Let there be a fair and impartial inquiry.
You know, we live in such desperately poor times for journalism that you and I, even if we wish to avoid it, we cannot but bring into focus something which normally should not be brought into focus, a completely unverified conversation between a so-called Russian military officer and one of the rebels saying that we are going to bring down, etc., etc. Now it has given such wide publicity that our silence on it will not matter. It shouldn't have happened. What do you say? Where lies the truth?
Well, actually, having listened to the tapes, it clearly does not say that we are going to bring down an aircraft.
Well, you are the only one who would have understood that language.
It clearly doesn't say that. Secondly, if you listen to it carefully, you can see the shock and horror in the voices of one of the people when he describes that it's a civilian aircraft and there is, all kinds of children's dolls and stuff around the place. Third, and which is most conclusive, is that experts have looked into the timestamp on when this was uploaded to YouTube, and it was apparently spliced together as a recording a day before this actually happened. So this is all now open to interpretation. Now, whether this is disinformation from one side or the other side, I don't know. But as Vivek had pointed out, in these civilized times, an impartial, transparent inquiry is the only thing that will settle this issue in terms of who is at fault and making sure that whoever is to blame is punished.
We have, in fact, all three of you, Vivek, I have spoken to the ambassador Alexander Karakin this morning, and I shall at some stage play my brief conversation. I also reached Kiev. Ambassador Jeff Pyatt used to be a friend here, if you recall. Everyone must have known him then. So he has sent me a little clip of what he has to say. We'll play that at some stage. Meanwhile, Karakin, in his, as you will hear, he says that there's no alternative but to a transparent inquiry into the event. Now what is the problem?
No, there are several problems. The first is that who will conduct the impartial inquiry? Yeah. You've got to agree on a set of investigators in whom all parties and the international community will have confidence. That is the first problem. Let us not forget the Iraq inquiry relating to chemical weapons. So that is a problem. The second is that this was, the crash took place in an area which is controlled by the rebels. Now, the entire scene there has been has changed. So, and the investigators may well come to the conclusion that what they were really looking for is no longer there. So, while all of us want a fair, independent and credible inquiry, there are problems there, and there will always remain problems. You talked of intercepts. Intercepts itself are in the best of hands capable of different interpretations. The same evidence can be looked at by different experts who come to very different conclusions. But having said that, I think a full attempt has to be made so that we reach to the end of this. The problem is that such incidents become instruments of use in times of contestation.
Yes.
So they are always utilized. And you see the barrage that has been let loose in the Western media against Russia. It's not so much the rebels who are under attack. The target of attack is Russia and in particular President Putin. Now, that to my mind is a mistake if you want to get to the bottom of it. Having said that, one must recognize that President Putin has himself asked for a transparent inquiry. So there are several complications in this, but nevertheless, such a thing is not acceptable. I mean, there are conflict zones, and we all try to avoid conflict zones. I remember, if I may just add one more sentence, I remember at a time, there was a time when Afghanistan in the 90s was a no-fly zone for Air India. And I recollect from
when I was staying with you.
I recollect a time when there was considerable loss to Air India because of the diversion in route that they had to undertake. At that time, the Indian system had come to the conclusion that we simply could not take the risk. Now, there are several questions that the Ukrainians here will have to answer. Why didn't they close this airspace? Why didn't they advise airliners to give them to adopt routes? Why didn't they prescribe routes which were different? Why didn't ICAO act? So all these issues are there, and it's terribly complex. But all that is on one side. On the other side is using such a thing for achieving your diplomatic and political ends. And all powers, great powers, utilize this. That's the test of history, I'm afraid.
John and Nandan, this is not mismanagement of this discussion. He is being allowed to monopolize the debate so far because he has to leave urgently. So he's being given more time. All right. Now, well, but he said a lot of very interesting things, which is look, there are two planes. There was a Malaysian plane 1 where nothing was so far found, which has disappeared. I'll let you know. Where nothing has been found yet. Here, the 2 black boxes are now available with whoever wants it. So the black box is available. Is that not? Now, I'm no expert, and there must be other evidence that people are looking at. What is your take?
Well, the black box will, of course, show the recordings of the conversations that were taking place in the cockpit at the time of the crash or whatever the event that brought the aircraft down. But at the same time, the black box may not necessarily provide conclusive evidence. They will require much more in terms of either interviews with witnesses who saw it from the ground and various other participants, if that is the right word. You know,
various other participants, you mean?
Well, you know, if they can try and find out where the missile was fired from.
That is the critical issue on which we shall come after a short break. We'll take a short break, in which period we shall say goodbye to our friend Vivek Katju, and then we resume Wide Angle.